Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces and a few new faces, so welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. I know it's a tricky day today with lots of dignitaries visiting, and welcome to our friends who have joined us on the live stream. My name is Asad Lalji. I'm the CEO of Avid Learning. After exploring Indo-Gothic in our first edition and Bauhaus in the second, we now arrive at the third episode of Motifs, Materials and Makers series, my personal favorite design style, mid-century modern. The mid-century period was an age of dreams and optimism. In the 50s and 60s were all about making it new, about laying claim to the future. For designers and architects especially, it was an extraordinary time to be at work, and the opportunity for creativity and originality were widespread. From iconic furniture that has become timeless pieces of 20th century classics to pioneering ideas of open plans, modularity, plastic products, miniaturization, mid-century modern design laid the foundation of how we live now. This evening, we explore the spirit of that era, what it meant then, and why it still resonates with us in an age of evolving technologies and new design futures. A special thank you to Ms. Nidhi Chaudhary, Director of the NGMA and Deputy Curator of Shruti Das for hosting us here. Ms. Agarwal, Convener of Intact's Greater Mumbai Chapter, for partnering with us in this series. And this brings me to the task at hand. Avid Learning, in collaboration with the National Gallery of Modern Art, Mumbai, and Intact Greater Mumbai Chapter, presents Motifs, Materials and Makers of Mid-Century Modern Design. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished speakers on stage. Co-founder and principal designer, Quirk Studios, Shivani Ajmera. Principal architect, Nikhil Mahashur and Associates, and founder of Walkitecture, Nikhil Mahashur. Architect, artist, urbanist, principal and co-founder, SVR Foundation and MD MRC Private Limited, Rohit Raj Mehendiratha. And our moderator for this series, Assistant Professor, Architecture and Urban Conservation Program, Kavya Sanaya Vandrewala. Thank you all once again for being here. Look forward to an exciting discussion, and over to you, Sanaya.
Good evening, everybody. Mid-century modernism in India emerged as both an architectural experiment and a cultural statement during the formative years of nation building. It represented an evolution in thought where design was closely tied to ideas of social reform, urban growth, and the shaping of collective aspirations. Modernist forms carried a symbolic weight, projecting images of progress and equality, while new housing and planning models sought to redefine everyday living environments. At the same time, its architectural language drew from an international vocabulary, yet demanded local interpretation, forcing a balance between universality and adaptation. Material choices, whether concrete, brick, or steel, were not merely technical, but became tools to negotiate climate, economy, and cultural expression. This adaptation created a distinct Indian modernism that was both inventive and contextually responsive. In parallel, the movement reshaped lifestyles and aesthetics through interiors that emphasize functionality, openness, and lightness over heavy ornamentation. Furniture, layouts, and domestic spaces reflected changing social patterns and the aspiration of a growing middle class. Rather than being confined to monumental projects, modernism also entered intimate settings, influencing the way people lived and interacted daily. Its layered legacy remains a reminder that architecture is never just about form, but about the ideals, adaptations, and lived experiences it enables. We have a great set of panelists today who will be bringing their expertise and experience to enrich today's discussion. We will begin with Rohit's presentation, followed by Nikhil and Shivani. Rohit?
So I'm going to go extempo on this. I've sort of prepared the PowerPoint, and I'm trying to bring together the whole history of modernism in India, in Delhi, and through Delhi and Chandigarh in the post-colonial scenario. And I start with Chandigarh, which was a Nehruvian project which sort of had a happy resonance with Le Corbusier, who was one of the most important architects of the 20th century. And Chandigarh was also became a trademark of Nehruvian socialism and the idea of what Indian modernity could be post colonization, post independence. And the paradigm Corbusier referred to, which he was himself party in making, was called high modernism. It was an ideology which worked with the idea of the fact that history is something to be tapped into, that time is something to be tapped into through the spirit of the age, a Hegelian idea of the spirit of the age, which for Corbusier and many others of his contemporaries was the idea of the machine. And how can urbanity change from the medieval patterns and settlements into a new kinetic city? And he finally had his opportunity through Chandigarh to display what his ideas were, which brought together his sense of what a kinetic environment of movement, the automobile, along with the idea of the Howard Green's idea of the garden city. It all came together through this gridded pattern of sectors, 800 by 1200 meters each grid was, with a central with the idea of greens, which sort of went through the city, and roads, arterial roads, which sort of connected all the sectors. So the whole idea of the automobile city came, but also the idea of space which could be replicated, the sectors, and the idea of the neighborhood came into the picture. Along with that, there was also a modernity which was forming in Chandigarh, which was the lake that happened. It was one of the first lakes in a sort of man-made lake by an Indian engineer, Mr. Verma, as well as the rock gardens. There were these indigenous modernities that were being formed in this very sort of not cosmopolitan, but globalized vision of what India should be. Le Corbusier prioritized his architecture to three buildings: the High Court, the Secretariat, and the Legislative Assembly, right up on the northern side, which sort of emblemized the new Punjab and the new capital for Punjab. And this was also the first time Indian engineers were actually designing structures beyond the PWD spaces. And the man in the bottom corner there is my father, who was involved with the High Court as well as the Secretariat, and he was involved with understanding structures. He was a civil engineer from Lahore, but this was his first introduction into structures, and he was already sort of contributing and talking to Le Corbusier for these buildings. Can we go to the next one? And this was Delhi in parallel, which was already sort of a space where Lutyens' Delhi had already emerged, and also it was a city that was being constantly imploded and by the whole refugee crisis that was happening. And the master plan which came in the 62 was another form of rationality, another form of modernism that was happening. But previous to that, there was already a pattern that was being created in the city through government housing. And this was another type of modernism, another type of rationality which believed in cells and functionality and the whole idea of repetition and the ease of repetition in a frugal space of the economy that happened. But also it very neatly fit into the Nehruvian socialist ideas of modernity and what India should sort of symbolize. In the meantime, my father in Delhi started working with architects to create these fantastic buildings which are on the other corner. So this whole period is what I call social modernity, where the idea of frugality and the idea of innovation went hand in hand, and you had a sort of a palimpsest of housing cells that were being developed, which may not be the best architectural interventions, but they were the need of the time in one sense. There was a collective memory that was happening. At the same time, intense innovation structurally and materially was happening with concrete, with architects and engineers coming together to form these various spectacular buildings that you see there. Next. And now, many of these spaces, the ones I showed, lie demolished. And the whole politics of demolition comes into play, where Hall of Nations, the Hindon River Mills, and Sarojini Nagar, which I showed you the plan, are demolished spaces. And instead of Hall of Nations, we have the Bharat Mandapam. Hindon River Mills was a private space which has now gone to whom we have no idea. And Sarojini Nagar is now going to be a high-rise space. And it is this is sort of my artwork, which I'm sort of talking about how demolition becomes political, how de-articulation becomes a system of erasing memory and erasing actually an inheritance and a brilliance that this society had because of frugality and because of the times that we were in. So this is where I leave it, and then we can go on with questions.
Hi, thanks, Asad, for this. I'm going to talk a little more about, mid-century modern as a whole. Every time I thought about mid-century modern, I always wondered whether it is modern or not. And then when you kind of dig deeper, you realize that it's one of those funky, cool cousins of modernism. Essentially, if modern is modern, then mid-century modern is, more futuristic in a way. Though it doesn't look that sculptural, but in a way, it's more modern than modern. It's one step ahead. So Bauhaus was the earlier style that preceded mid-century modern, the style that it had clean geometrical lines. It was more industrial, it was more strict. But mid-century modern came and it was more softer, it was more organic. And my favorite mid-century modern, which is very closely associated with modern as well, will be the Falling Waters. So one of the most organic buildings that was built. It's got a waterfall through the building, and every architect would have studied, or looked at, the falling waters. And what Frank Lloyd Wright did was actually burst open mid-century modern in a way. It also integrated the landscape with it. So if you ever visit, Falling Waters, and you'll know the windows are so small that the minute you enter, you look outside into the greenery. So you think that you're almost along with the landscape that's there. Mid-century modern had an open floor plan. So if you look here, this was an office floor plan, which we all now, it's all there all over Bombay. And of course, this was the first building in Bombay to have that, which was Petroleum House in Churchgate, which was by our very own Kamu Iyer. Even in the kitchen, the living room and the dining room was an open floor plate. So the house automatically looked much bigger because suddenly there was no wall in between. You could move from one room to the other without really having a wall in the middle. So automatically the houses looked large. This is Eames House. And again, it was one of those case studies. And if you look at it, it's we talk about modular in mid-century modern. You can see modular furniture that's there in the Johnson Wax house. And here, when you talk about modular, you have these modular windows that are there. Large windows, but modular. You have steel sections that are there. And the best part about it, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a blue pop-up that was there. So a lot of color being used in mid-century modern. And then when you look at it, you'll find that the glass is what really shines out bright within all these buildings. This one was Raja Adri's house. And again, when I said sculptural, much softer, you see a hyperbolic parabola being used on that. But what's one thing that's common between all these buildings is the use of glass, is the use of materials. There was concrete, there was glass, and you see here that though Bauhaus and the other styles before that used a lot of glass and concrete, what mid-century modern did was that it used glass, concrete, and steel, but along with that, it went back in time and used natural materials. So it used a lot of brick, exposed brick. It used a lot of exposed concrete, a lot of exposed stone as well. And if that wasn't enough, it used newer materials. So you had suddenly synthetic materials being used. You had a lot of plastic being used. You had a lot of plywood being used. Plastic was an invention at that time. It was easily moldable, and that's why everyone wanted to use plastic. Whenever I think of plastic, whenever I think of mid-century modern, Star Trek comes to my mind. When I told you it was a bit futuristic, the best thing to look at is Star Trek. And if you see Star Trek, those sliding doors, and you see those tulip chairs that were there, there, that was all mid-century modern. A lot of steel was used in the trusses. Mr. Adri has made Sunshine Towers, which is at Parel, and he's used the same concept. So he's used the steel as a truss. So that gives you an open floor plan, and also it increases the size of the plan. It's a column-free space. What the materials did was, one was that, you know, it gave timelessness. For example, you can take Philip Johnson's house and place it anywhere. Anything that was green, you place that building, and you know, you could have that on any plot of land. So it was duplication that was there, mass production. Plastic allowed us mass production. Also, it gave a lovely contrast. So you imagine using glass on one side, and then you're using the warmth of the wood that was there, the natural wood. So you're using oak and timber along with glass, or you're using stone and brick along with glass, and it looks absolutely stunning. And if you look at all the images, you'll see, I mean, this is our very own NCPA right here, and you see how beautiful it is. And if you look at it as a whole, you'll see that it's got everything that I'm speaking about. It's got the concrete, it gives you the straight lines of the building. The stonework accentuates the building. And of course, on the side is this lovely glass with exposed stone, and the greenery that connects everything. One building in Bombay, which is my ex-bosses, my sirs, my mentors' building, is Mahindra Towers. So everything that I've spoken about, which has glass, brick, exposed brick, RCC, is all there to see in Mahindra Towers. Mr. Adri got glass to India. The first building that he built of glass, or both conceived at the same time, was Mahindra Towers and La Meridian in Delhi. If anyone's ever driven past Mahindra Towers, you would see the red brick is beautiful. It's got sloping walls because it's got RCC that's been sloped. But the most beautiful part of that building is it's got a lovely circular fountain that's there. You know, there looks like discs, and if you just pass by at the corner, and you'll see that fountain with the backdrop of the entire building and the space frame. So steel is used, aluminium is used, a lot of woodwork as well. So actually, it summarizes everything, and it would be because Mr. Adri was a disciple of Frank Lloyd Wright. You know, and then of course. I was a disciple of Mr. Adri, and that's why if you see our work at the bottom, you'll see that we've got kind of, you know, similar styles. But as Mr. Adri always said, that you can try to be Frank Lloyd Wright, but you're always Frank Lloyd wrong. Okay, thanks.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm Shivani Ajmera. I'm the co-founder of Quirk Studio, a residential interior design practice based in Mumbai. I grew up in a bustling, large joint family in the 80s. Our apartment was always full. Cousins running around, aunts, uncles gathered in the living room, everyone with their own corners, yet the home felt harmonious. I remember the teak dining table that hosted endless meals and celebrations, the wide windows that let in Mumbai's golden light, a swing by the window where we'd sit and watch the world go by, the TV tuned into Doordarshan, playing our favorite childhood shows in the background. The mix of armchairs and low coffee tables anchored the spaces. Everything was functional, yet playful, perfect for a household of many personalities. There was a rhythm in chaos, spaces designed for living, moving, and connecting, not for show. Even without realizing it, mid-century modern principles were all around me. Purposeful furniture, clean lines, natural light, and proportionate layouts. Those early experiences shaped my understanding of interiors. That design must balance function, social energy, and the human experience. Less about decoration and more about how life unfolds in a space. As we design in today's context, we see those same mid-century modern principles reflected in minimalism and contemporary design. Our lives today are fast-paced, our homes often more compact, and we crave for clarity and calm. Minimalism offers that by stripping away the unnecessary and focusing on what truly serves us. It's not about starkness or emptiness, but about intention, about creating space for light, movement, and breadth. And in today's world, it's also about thinking sustainably, choosing materials that last, designing spaces that adapt, and integrating technology seamlessly. In many ways, contemporary minimalism in mid-century modern, it's evolved, since grounded in function and honesty, but adapted to the needs of urban living and realities of today. In our own practice at Quirk Studio, we don't replicate mid-century modern principles, but we reinterpret it. For us, it's about creating a look and more about carrying forward its value and philosophy, authenticity in materials, functionality, and sense of timelessness. We embrace minimalism, but with warmth, natural stone, wood, layered lighting, and hard-crafted details that bring a tactile quality to our spaces. Our goal has always been balance. Homes that are minimal yet inviting, contemporary yet timeless. When we design this way, our spaces feel deeply personal, grounded, and enduring. Much like mid-century modern itself. They are homes that feel relevant, not just for today, but for the decades to come. We'll talk more about this on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you to all the panelists for such wonderful presentations. I think we'll just dive into the discussion. Rohit, you kind of spoke about the post-independence period in India, where modernism was kind of seen as for new urban ideals and architectural experiments. Could you take us through a little bit about how the evolution of the design language happened during this formative period?
In terms of the evolution in the West or in India?
Of course, the connect from the West to the...
I mean, in the West, the evolution started in what they call the mid-war modernism that started, and the whole idea of how do you... that's a time when history was sort of contested in terms of this idea to... earlier, modernization or modernism really meant reinterpreting history and choosing the type of history you want to rework. So there was Neo-Gothic or Art Deco, whichever one you take. But it was in between the two world wars that the ideal of actually the emancipation from history emerged, and the idea that the individual sort of creates their own references, and this Hegelian idea of history, the idea of epochs, that what is the spirit of the age came into being. And Le Corbusier, for example, felt that machines were the spirit of the age. So for him, it was understanding what was the idea of an urbanity which linked itself to the idea of machines. So it became the idea of programming, and very simply sort of splitting the idea of living, work, recreation, and also the idea of the kinetics of transportation, which excited him a lot. And so he created new imaginations based on that. And then there were different types of modernism that emerged in that time. So, I mean, the whole idea of rationality that time really got split into the idea of formalism, logical atomism, and functionality. So formalism was this idea of extremely formal sort of ideation of what things could be. So like the idea of the machine and the formalization of that. Then logical atomism really became about the idea of paths to the whole, of sort of creating this mechanization of construction and industry. And the last one was functionality. So what is the real functions? And these forms of rationalities, actually each individual sort of, based on their temperament and individuality, sort of created their own vision. So when it came to India, Le Corbusier and Nehru's vision sort of really resonated. Nehru's idea of socialism and his idea of modernity, which sort of split India away from its past, was exactly what Corbusier wanted to do with respect to his idea of moving outside the medieval city and coming into a space of a modernity which was based on the idea of the machine. So Chandigarh was not his sort of idea of the machine in one sense. It was also embodying the idea of the green lungs for the city and embodying a human scale, which was not there in his earlier imaginations. But the cohesion of the Nehru as a de facto client and Corbusier as someone who was working sort of gave India its first image of modernity, I would say.
I think we can delve a little more into understanding the aesthetics, and I think Nikhil can share his viewpoint on this. That it was not just, of course, we've discussed and we've seen the presentation, it was not just about the aesthetics, it was more than that. It was about these progressive social movements that some of you have even highlighted. So how do you think the Indian architects balanced this universality? The global appeal of modernism and with our post-independence period, and the fact that it was needed to address the local needs and also the Indian identity at that point in time?
Yeah, see, essentially it was a very popular, because it was timeless, it was a very popular style. So I think it was easily embraced, because when you talk about versatility, when you talk about all these elements, it was very quick to come into India or Bombay. For example, the houses. Now, if you look at houses abroad before, we had the kitchens right at the back. So if you were to look at an English house or you watch an American movie in the 1920s, you had the kitchen right at the back, and you had butlers coming in, and you had people coming in, the maids coming in. Now suddenly, because of the war, post-World War, no one really had that much money. So suddenly the butlers were gone, the maids were gone, and suddenly the woman was working in the house. She was also taking care of the kids. And suddenly she realized that if I'm looking after my husband who's got a broken limb and watching television, I want the kitchen right in the front. So suddenly, when houses were designed all over the world, mid-century modern houses, all of them had the kitchen right in the front, where the woman could cook, go to work, come back, take care of the kids, and basically she had a voice. So she wanted to look around and see what's happening in the house. Similar with India. So when you come to India, and when houses are designed now in India, because of the independence, because of women going to work, etc., and the voice of the woman rising, the same thing came here in Bombay. Even till today, if you look at it, Art Deco, mid-century modern, everyone, you'll find that every house has the kitchen right in the front. So, similar things like this was easily, and of course I told you it's futuristic. So anyone's designing, modern buildings, it's a little boring because the ground floor to the 40th floor is the same. Suddenly you have mid-century modern that says, okay, now I suddenly use wood, I can now use stone, I can use brick. So suddenly that became extremely popular. Glass was easy to get. So suddenly in the 60s and 70s, when there was a boom of glass that came into India, every architect wanted, to use glass and exposed brick, as I showed you. So that way it was quite easy to adapt because of the features. Say, in the sense that if it was Bauhaus, it would have been much more difficult because you didn't want a strict industrial-looking building. It doesn't give you that aesthetic sense. And that's, I hope I've kind of understood your question.
I think Shivani can continue from there, and because she even in her presentation spoke about her family and growing up days, and the fact how you've kind of carried that ethos through your practice as well.
Yes.
So if we talk about everyday lifestyles and how modernism influenced this, could you tell us, or rather, talk a little bit more about the cultural patterns of domestic life, the Indian cultural patterns, and how this idea of principles of modernity, you even highlighted in your presentation, clean lines, functionality,
Yes. Yeah.
Openness, right? Correct. So how do you think the domestic life in India kind of incorporated these aspects?
So I'll be honest with you. I feel like the entire family structure of India has changed so much in the last 20, 25 years. We're no longer a joint family. All that has kind of disintegrated. We're now nuclear families. In fact, couples without children, couples with dogs. So we have clients who come to us with all these various sort of requirements in terms of just their family structure. What we've keenly observed through the requirements and the clients that have come to us is that Typically, they all come with a requirement of having a warm, nice, modern, cozy home. That's what we get a lot from clients in general. But what they don't realize when they're saying that is actually they're really just sort of translating timeless philosophies of mid-century modern. This is exactly what the movement was all about. It was about creating homes that were warm, that had that were emotionally rich, but also sort of very functional, straight line, clean, uncluttered. All of that was a very big part of that movement. And now we sort of, in our practice as well, have taken forward the philosophy of it more than anything. So our work is not typically mid-century modern. It's sort of an evolved version of that in many ways. And that's our clientele as well. They come to us with those requirements. Like Nikhil correctly mentioned, the woman of the family, her role has changed dynamically, dramatically as well. She is no longer just a homemaker. She's working. Kids are doing 50 different things. So our homes have to now sort of curate to those requirements. They have to cater to the woman of the family, the multiple kids, the grandparent who comes once in a while. So all these things we have to consider while we create our projects. So for us, that is truly the essence. When we sort of sit with a pencil and paper and start the design process, it really starts with functionality to kind of gauge what the energy of the house should be in terms of requirement. And then we sort of move forward with designing and aesthetic. That all comes as secondary and as we sort of move along in the process.
I think since we are on the topic of housing and lifestyle, this would be a good point to discuss, with all the government-led cooperative housing projects and initiatives that were coming up with the emerging middle class. Rohit, how do you think the architects or engineers had engaged? Because all of a sudden, even post-independence period for us, that was the requirement at that point in time. So you have these hordes of housing projects coming in. What sort of language do you think the architects or the engineers would have evolved at that point in time to kind of deal with this initiative?
So, the slide shows it was actually this language started during the colonial time itself, but in under the British, the same architects were actually using references of the past. So you had sort of neoclassical motifs, so you had sort of what is called Art Deco in a very functional layout, which was also class based, and so that whole colonial legacy continued into post independence. But what was stripped was the references to the past, the history, and it really became pure functional objects in landscape. And that's where this was almost like this is where this whole idea of these cells literally replicating themselves extremely sort of, which alluded to the whole idea of manufacturing, of efficiency, of frugality. It took place in the most neutral and sort of banal way, I would say. But it was the need of the time because I think post-partition, the influx of refugees, say in Delhi, I think 80,000 dwelling units were needed in a year's time when CPWD started. So there was an urgency and almost like literally an emergency of social situation which was only fulfilled through the designs that emerged. So I would not want to criticize it in that sense. I think it was also partially delving into the Nehruvian vision that was happening. And as the decades went on, the architects that emerged, Raj Rawal, Doshi, Kanvinde, Kuldeep Singh, and many others, they created their own interpretation of that modernism and modernity. And that sort of started again referencing Indian urbanity and sort of the idea of streets, chalks, porticos started coming. But that happens later in the 70s and the 80s when architecture starts becoming more privatized and the government takes a back seat.
So Rohit mentioned about modernism really essentially stripping away the past. Shivani, how do you think this negotiation had happened between the minimalism for modern style and the fact that India has a long-standing tradition of ornamentation? So it's a very huge shift.
It is. I think there are two parts to this. One, of course, there's a whole sort of urban demographic that is changing towards very minimal homes. They want less is more is the mantra. They sort of want personal spaces, very uncluttered, sort of restraint, a lot of restraint in the space. But there's also now in the last 5 to 6 years, we've been seeing this wave of people wanting to embrace heritage, wanting to go back to basics, wanting to go back and sort of embrace, craftsmanship, things that really belong to our country. So I feel like it's a bit of both. You want things that matter, that came from the past, but you want to sort of have a modern take. You want to sort of give your spin to it. That's really, that sweet spot that as a designer we sort of work with. Because clients appreciate less is more, but they also sort of want things that tell a story, that sort of tell their story more than ever. Things that mattered, a grandmother who passed on something to them, or, like an old Almira that they had that was there for a really long time, refurbished. So these are the things that we sort of like to incorporate in our homes as well. And that's the interesting play of briefs that we get as well. Minimal homes, but something that still is very, very emotionally deep and connected to what truly matters to them. So, yeah.
Of course, this a lot of you have spoken about in your presentations as well, where we've been talking about materiality. Nikhil, with respect to India's climate, and the resources and construction methods that we have a long-standing tradition with, what role do you think this materiality played in this adaptation of this new style? And do you think the material and structural innovations of that time still hold lessons for contemporary designers?
So before I start, I just wanted to add something. When you were talking about housing, this was the era of mass production. So when we talk about mass production, it also comes down to material. And, how did mass production come here? Is simple example is the American diner. And everything is cookie cutter. And when you come back to Bombay, or rather India, and you see the housing, you'll see that it's all cookie cutter. You look at the DDA flats, etc. They're all the same, though they may be mid-century modern, but they're all the same. And in a similar fashion, with material, whatever was mass-produced, we were using it, and which is very similar to what it is today. I'll tell you, an example. We used to work at Mahindra Towers, and I had a friend who came over, and her, she's from our college, and she came and she was, Mr. Adri gave her a lecture on how air conditioning is the best thing to happen, how curtain wall is the best thing to happen. And she was totally aghast and totally irritated by the fact that, this person, after I come back from my march doing sustainability, is now criticizing sustainability. And then when we went down from the elevator, because it was the first capsule elevator that was built, you could actually see all the greenery that was there in the building. And then you realize that Mahindra Towers is one of the most sustainable buildings that's there, because when you go down onto the first floor, they've got these sloping walls that actually create a mountain, the hill effect that we say. So they are very naturally ventilated spaces. Though there's a curtain wall that's there, these are naturally ventilated spaces. So taking that example, though we're using glass, though we're using concrete, it's still a very sustainable design element, because one is that there is greenery, and of course, because of the open floor plan, there's a lot of ventilation. So one is that it's one of the most widely successful styles in India when it comes to material. When we talk about exposed brick, exposed stone, it looks fabulous when it comes to glass. And what it does, it also accentuates a particular line in the building. And that's why this style, because again, I keep saying it's timeless, materiality is ideal for this. And even today, you can use it. And I think even the next 50 years, you'll be able to use the same material that mid-century modern gave us.
So, of course, we've seen that this modernism has existed along with traditional building practices. It was not that it was completely lost. Rural architecture, we still had a bit of colonial hangover, the way we look and use our buildings. So, a lot of these contradictions were there in India when modernism existed. Rohit, do you think that modernism could genuinely be indigenous, or is it always going to be an import?
No, I think, like in Chandigarh, what I showed the Premchand's rock gardens, Mr. Verma's idea of the lake for the city, these all indigenous modernities, sort of something that came from the heart of people who wanted to do something very local, finding situations within that. And also then the professionals, as they grew, just the, I mean, like what the way the careers of Doshi, Korea, Rajwal, Kuldeep Singh, I mean, and then all the Bombay group of architects, as well as the architects in Delhi of the next generation. I mean, it is about how to, what was Indian about, what was the identity that made modern architecture, India became sort of their core narrative to discover and work with. Until the 80s, it was actually, I think, one of the most important times of Indian architecture, 60s, 70s, 80s, because it was actually using material which was concrete, steel, glass, but how do you make it Indian? And what was the response you had towards climate, towards habitat, towards society, and towards the programming and the functions that were required to make things Indian. And then the 80s critical regionalism came, and I think that lasted for 10 years, and then we lost our way. And we are still trying to find our way back. But I think these, and this was also the space of the more healthiest collaborations between engineers and architects. The buildings I showed you were all in the 60s and the 70s, and they went till the 80s, where it was really about innovation in frugality. And that's what, for me, is, I've coined the term socialist modernity for that, where there was mass production, but there was innovation because of the frugality of means. You could not afford steel, you could not afford glass, you could afford concrete, you could afford brick, and that's all you had. And how do you work with that? And some great stuff happened because of that.
So since we're talking about the Indian context, Shivani, we've also spoken about, you've spoken about how families have changed. And of course, I mean, you cannot have a direct comparison in having a family in India as opposed to maybe, say, American or a European family, which would have had kind of an encounter with modernism. In the same sense, when we talk about, architecture is all about the light. Do you think this context of how a family functions, and even for that matter, how everybody interprets light, what do you think this contemporary interiors, when we are talking about you being inspired from modernist principles to when we are looking at these contemporary interiors for house and workplace, both, right. Do you think how is this light is being used? Has that kind of, is there a difference in between looking at a Western idea of way the light would enter a space, or within the Indian context?
Yeah. No, so typically I feel lighting is a very, very integral part of design in general. When we walk into a space, the first thing as a client or as a designer you'd look at is the amount of light that comes into a space. And we design so much around it. So whether it's, the high ceilings that we sort of, make sure we retain, or the large windows that we make sure that we sort of integrate into the design, it's such a big part. It's actually where everything begins. It's the large windows, and it's the ceiling heights that sort of, dictate that initial design phase entirely. And most definitely, I feel like lighting, in terms of just playing a role of how it's even I'm talking about technical light that you bring into interior design, the way it falls on a beautiful piece of art or sculpture, or the way it sort of dims in the evening to sort of create a setting. It's such a big part of how people live, exist, and sort of enjoy their space. So yes, I mean it is still evolving, and lighting is not as the West has sort of embraced it much more than we have, but it's very much part of our designing now, and very important to our spaces, to clients as well. Yeah.
Since we are on material, and Nikhil has mentioned several times, the use of favoring exposed concrete, steel frames, large glass surfaces. You even showed us a couple of examples of that. And of course, we've seen this influx in the 20th century of, foreign import styles, which kind of then came to India, whether it was Art Deco, Bauhaus, and of course the mid-century modernism that we are talking about. There was a lot of interpretation by the Indian architects. We had to suit our local conditions, cultural preferences. How do you think this balance was kind of struck, where we have imported kind of a Western idea, but we have to kind of make it work within our local context?
Okay, but essentially it was much more simpler than that, because when Frank Lloyd Wright started designing buildings, he made something which we call modular. Modular means a module, and what he did was he used modules of 1200 by 1200, and with that concept that came to Bombay, everything was, or rather India, everything was under that module. There are some students here, so I'll be a little just telling them. Modules means that everything that you do in interiors or architecture, he used to take a module of 300. So everything was a module. So you design a table, it should be divisible by 300. You take a window size, he took a door size which was 2400. So you divide that into 300. It's always a divisible of 3. So you go to a bathroom and then you do 300, and then you get the bathroom height, which is 900. A WC needs 900 on center to center. So again, it's a module of 3. So that module concept was actually at the base. So when it came back to Bombay, in India, I keep saying Bombay because of me working with Mr. Adri, but when it came to India, it was just about following that module. So it was much easier to do. We've already discussed that it was more concrete, etc. But post the 70s, there was much more flair. So there was glass, but glass also came in that module. So if you're doing glass, it was the module. Some architects went a step ahead. And as I showed you, Mr. Adri did the hyperbolic parabola. So, of course, there were these inventions. Because it was concrete, it was possible. If they were doing it as a stone structure, it wouldn't have been possible. And Mr. Raj has designed it structurally. So, and just imagine that the slab was only 3 inches of design on that thing. So, of course, they were adapting to it. Material was available. The mid-century modern that I have seen is more of flair, is more of promise. Because when Mr. Adri talks about him and Mr. Raj going to Uran to do the house, he talks about a yacht ride with champagne and caviar on that in the 60s. So, so more, I will give you a more flary version, much more fun version of mid-century modern. And if you look all around, like the La Méridien Hotel, Mahindra Towers, you name it, even Kanchenjunga for that matter, it has made materials not that prominent, but the design much more prominent. So though we say that mid-century modern was form follows function, in the context of India, I think form was essential. And today when you look at it, it was less function and more form, because we're all talking about these buildings because they look so good.
If we can go back to the slides, I can show, unless your question deals with innovation and all that, then I can sort of give, because there are students here. So, just to start with Chandigarh, what those, the slides of the labor, with the camel and all that's just all to show that it was literally, when Chandigarh happened, technology-wise, India was zero. So it's literally these buildings which still capture global imagination were built, literally crafted by hand by the Indian labor. And that's why they're unique. That's why, because they belong to that period where you don't get that labor now. You don't get that commitment of the contractors. You don't get that commitment of even the professionals to make things happen. And so that's what, I mean, there are stories of my father's interaction with Le Corbusier, but we can do that later. If you go to the next slide, even though, so this was example of mass production and the whole idea of functional units coming together on one hand, and then you have these buildings, each one superbly innovative in starting from the first one, which was a pavilion designed by Charles Correa and my father Mahendra Raj. And again, there, it's sort of, this is done in 60s. Gary came in the 90s. And it was done based on a model. The contractor used models and the structural drawings, which were sort of talked about plates in a certain way and the reinforcement and the foundation to make that building happen. So it was innovation to the level where the contractor was open to literally scaling a model made by Charles Correa using the structural drawing references made by Mr. Raj to create something like this. So I think that innovation has to move beyond even the engineer and the architect to a larger community of contractors and the invisible laborers who actually made this happen. And I'll just talk about the Hall of Nations there, which was demolished, which was built in 72, 73. It was built in 1 year for the trade fair in Delhi. And it was designed in steel first because it was a space frame structure, and the costs were prohibitive, so it was removed and was designed in precast, and then finally in cast in situ. And cast in situ was the most economical way to do it, but also the most difficult. And that's where the innovation happened in terms of the joints, in terms of the slenderness that had happened was because of a rhomboid section that my father developed with Rajwal, and it's sort of, and it was a bottom-up building. But again, without that labor, without that contractor, without that period and that optimism, this would not happen. And that's why it is so sad that it's demolished. There are a lot of people who ask, even today, that can't this building be made somewhere else? It cannot be made because the intensity of making it was beyond, yes, there was a structural genius to it. There was a man who stood there without computers, just his own calculations, and said this is possible, making a 84 meter by 84 spans space frame structure in concrete, never done in the world before. But at the same time, he was supported intensely in that climate of optimism, of that reality and the laborers. So this is the type of innovation I'm talking about, and the materiality of innovation.
I just want to add that, that's so true what he's saying, that essence of that laborer being on site and creating something is what is lost today because of mass production. Because of we just go into an industry and getting it. And just to a little bit of information is that these people were the real artisans that were there, and we lost them, and that's why we have the word mistri. Because now we've all heard of mistri who says that, mistri nahi aaya aaj kaam ke liye, and he's the civil guy. But the word actually comes from the Portuguese word called mestre, which means an artisan. And these artisans actually did this, and they lost their jobs because of mass production, and now they've become mistries. But if you go back in time, they're actually the real experts that actually have built, India in a way.
Thank you. So we brought back Chandigarh, so it would be a good point in time to talk about it. Chandigarh has always been like a poster boy for Indian modernism. And of course, it was a modernist experiment and embodying national identity at that point in time. But there's always been critics of it also, that it was quite disconnected to its local context. How do you view its legacy today? Of course, there'll be successes and shortcomings, and also the fact that it still carries actually the symbolic weight of modernism in India. And this whole monumental vision where it talked about collective aspirations. You're building a new capital, you're going to consider for the administration, housing, all of that sort of kind of fitting in together.
I think I mean, Chandigarh's legacy is at multiple levels. I mean, yes, I can say, the criticism is actually easy. I mean, it lacks human scale sometimes. It's the broad avenues, the idea of public space is actually the green space, which becomes no man's land. One can say that, all that, and it's also a city, and a city develops, it breathes, and it grows, it ages, and that's how cities emerge. And if you go to Chandigarh today versus when I used to go there when I was a child, they're two different species almost. And one is time. You have to allow time to truly judge a city. And I think Chandigarh today is a very successful city in certain ways, particularly to the Indian lifestyle that we have adopted. I think the criticism also happened during the time of critical regionalism, and when the whole identity of the medieval city and the romanticization of the medieval cities by architects was paramount. But I think that has now quickly gone away with this whole explosion of cars and the environment and the selfishness of the civil society that is today, in terms of we do not want to use public transportation. We want our own cars. We want our own air conditioning. We want instant gratification in so many different ways that Chandigarh is actually a space which saw this in terms of its circulation, in terms of its green lungs, in terms of even positioning markets and sort of educational institutes to be able to bring a mixed demographics involved from students to professors to professionals to bureaucrats. They all work in a certain way. So I mean, that I think has been successful. Yes, at the same time it is classist. There was a whole hierarchy right from the government, the bureaucrats, the rich, and to the poor, and that was already laid in the soil. And it was called socialist modernity, and it was called an abstract sort of Nehruvian identity. So, I mean, there are a lot of hidden layers, but that, I think, is less to be blamed on Corbusier. It's more to be blamed on our own colonial legacy that we carried forward. So.
Since we are on Chandigarh, Shivani, we have even in the poster we had put in furniture from Chandigarh. So Chandigarh was not just design of the city, but even to something small as detailed as a chair, and still worldwide famous in that sense. So this period that we're talking about, 30s to the 70s, essentially was productive, inventing, and quite exciting when it came to objects and furniture for the house. Yeah. What transforms these design objects beyond these nostalgic collections into timeless functional elements that still continue to aspire?
I feel like what we call as modern contemporary design today is, again, a takeoff from what we call mid-century modern. Its philosophy is the timelessness, the form, everything. In our practice, typically when we adapt those principles, you will see it in small moments. You'll see it in the way our sofas curve, the material that we use on our chairs and sofas, or just the texture of the fabric, or even for that matter, I'm talking about even the flooring. Just the kind of we use kota sometimes, we use jaisalmer on the floor. So all these small elements that we bring from that philosophy in today's world, it all comes from there. Especially, I think, furniture. Like, I feel like we don't even realize it, but we're so attracted and so easily drawn to, that lovely rattan chair or a cane wardrobe with a shutter. So many Pinterest images our clients would share. And each one, if you actually go back and you see, it's all mid-century modern influences. And they don't even realize that it all comes from there. So whether it's, the form of our chairs or the fabrics that we use or the finishes on our floor or the wood finishes that we use on our cabinets, etc., I feel that's what we sort of bring from that movement and integrate it seamlessly into our practice. Yeah.
since we also look at mid-century modernism, and the important aspect of that becomes this whole innovation of open floor plan, and we see that running across through offices and then essentially homes and a lot of places. Nikhil, what does this architectural shift signify? Because of course, the society was changing at that point in time, and so were the spatial hierarchies. Could you kind of talk about this connect between this the social relationships and the spatial hierarchies that were happening?
See, the open floor plan, of course, gave us more space in a way, because you were reducing space in terms of offices, real estate space. But within the office, you were giving larger spaces. Even in the house, even in most houses today, the dining and the living will be common. And as Shivani said, even in her house, it would be. So even if the house is big or small, really didn't matter. These things without a wall, more like a partition that were there, was more important. So you would have a kitchen along with the dining area, along with the living area. So even if you were reducing the size of the house, inside it still looked large. And that was the essence. Again, light played an important part, because you look at any mid-century modern design, and even today's, you look at a Lodha, or you look at any other building that's there, light will be most important factor, even if it's air conditioning. So when it comes to socialism, we tend to say, again, I keep repeating it, and we say that sustainability is connected to that. And that is why I feel that mid-century modern, in terms of its layout, its open floor plan, was fantastic. Even the materials that were used, you'll have a lot of natural wood that was used, oak and timber that was used in the house. So even if there were large plans, or small floor plans, but open floor plans, you had a lot of wood in it, a light coming in. So you always get that feel of it. I was just looking around and saying that this is actually mid-century modern, but unfortunately there's no window here. So again, some of them is an issue, but overall, if you look at the table also, this is mid-century modern. So larger spaces done well, but suddenly you realize that there's no ventilation, and suddenly the space then doesn't look that fab. And that is why it was important that even if you had a smaller house, you had a larger window. And you see any mid-century modern building in the city will have all these points that we take. Have I answered it, or?
In fact, I want to add here that, about the open plans in general, we're seeing a big wave of open kitchens coming back in a big way in Indian homes. Again, because the joint family system is no longer prevalent. It's all become couples sort of, having closeness families, having friends coming over. They like that whole open kitchen, open plan, where conversation can be had easily. It's not one of those compartmentalized rooms anymore. That whole layout format has changed. And it's actually such a good time to sort of design in this age, because I feel like that narrative has changed, and everyone sort of wants a home that really speaks, to themselves. I mean, it's personal, but also sort of integrated in a way that it doesn't feel boxed in and separate. And so that's very nice to see and that's all mid-century modern.
And balconies are coming back with greenery. So you'll see that most of the new buildings will have a balcony with greenery. So essentially we're again moving towards it, which again comes back. It's timeless, so it's not going anywhere.
Totally. We have clients who come to us starting the brief by saying, we want lots of greenery. I mean, that's their first sort of this thing, the fact that they want to, and Bombay apartments, I'm talking about, your regular, like you mentioned, Lodha, etc. They want that indoor-outdoor experience. Again, a very, very strong principle of the mid-century modern movement. Yeah.
So my next question is, a little bit of reimagination, and that goes to all three of the panelists. So if each of you is tasked with reimagining mid-century modernism for 21st century India, what would you retain, what would you discard, and what would you reinvent?
It's a tough one. It'll take some time. It's difficult on a panel. But, such questions are very controversial. But, I don't like the... if it's a cookie cutter building, then I don't like it, and I would want to change that. I've been to these DDA flats in Delhi, which are mid-century modern, and they're terrible, and if it's that mass of concrete, and I'm not talking Chandigarh, okay? Though Chandigarh is a mass of concrete. So sometimes if I say it, you'll think that I'm talking of Chandigarh. Chandigarh is beautiful, so it has to be retained. And you don't really realize it till you mature as an architect. When you look at it, when we're studying it, you're not really fond of Chandigarh. It's only when you go there and you stand in front of those buildings is when you realize that there's God there.
You can't avoid Le Corbusier's brilliance.
Yeah, so
for
it's
sure.
absolutely brilliant. So that's something that should stay. Uh, Frank Lloyd Wright's disciple, when Mr. Adri designed those buildings, that flair is something that I absolutely love. So every building in that fashion, so whether it's Kanchenjunga, whether it's Petroleum House, and not many know of Petroleum House. I think it's one of the most beautiful buildings in Churchgate. It's the most sustainable building, and it's the first building to have an open floor plan. These should remain. So when we were on the walk, and some people say, "Oh, this looks like a modern building. Why do you need it?" And I'm like, "But this is what transformed Bombay into what it is." Essentially, if you ask an architect, it's very rare that they don't like a building. Because it's hard work to make a building, and essentially, I love Bombay in a way, and I love everything that comes with it. And essentially, every mid-century modern building should be there because I essentially love glass. So if it's on a personal thing, then I think all these buildings must remain.
Would you like to reinvent any aspect?
Reinvent. We try to do it. We're designing buildings which are heritage, like we're doing a couple of hotels, and we try to get mid-century modern in it. Till, of course, the client says, no, you can't put so much glass in Udaipur. But we tried in our practice. We've done a bungalow in Breach Candy, and I took Adri's principles to do it, so with balconies, etc. So I love the concept of balconies. I love the concept of atriums. I love the concept of glass above. So we try to reimagine it. Of course, if it aligns with the client. But yeah, I really wouldn't want to touch someone else's work to reimagine something on theirs. But in whatever way I can do it, I will do it.
In the interior context for homes, I think what I would like to retain about the mid-century modern philosophy is the fact that it's so timeless. And I feel like that's the beauty of the entire movement in general. That's what I would want to kind of, build spaces that are classic, not trend-driven, build something that's here to stay, and not sort of, doesn't need a revamp in 5 to 10 years. I think that's the philosophy that I would like to retain. The one thing that I don't particularly love is the dark walnut shade in general, like the veneers. I think our reinvention is, using a lot of oak now in general. So that's the controversial not liking of mid-century modern. Reinvent, I think nothing in particular. What I feel as a design practice and as designers who think like us, it's important to keep the conversation going, to sort of evolve from that philosophy and constantly reinvent, because they had some beautiful, beautiful philosophies. And I think just imbibing those and evolving from there and keeping that conversation going is what we need to do as a fraternity. Yeah.
So I'm supposed to answer for architecture or for the city? So I think, even though I've sort of protected Chandigarh, I would say modernism and urbanity were a disaster. And that's why we are here today, because of this whole separation of functions and the master plans, which took rationality to an extreme level of functionality and eradicating the idea of space. And just everything is tabula rasa, and you're just literally marking lines without connections. So I think it was a disastrous moment. At the same time, it was also one of the most fertile moments of imagination. So there's this funny contradiction. So what I would leave behind is, yes, many of the tenets of urbanism that came through this, or which I would say maybe were misunderstood. They were better as imaginations rather than real life, but somehow they are still carrying on with us. And I think that is something we have to critically evaluate and understand the role of urban design, understand the role of scale, understand the role of human occupation. And Patrick Geddes comes back to mind, and how we have to look at the other narratives which were there, but they have been sort of subjugated. With respect to architecture, I think it was one of the most fertile moments in the history of architecture, because the idea of space was reimagined, and the idea of the open plan, or the idea of the view, the idea of movement, and the movement of the human being to space. They were all, and that's continuously being sort of. That's a exploration that's been happening, and that's been the success of also architecture today, is that continues to be it. What I would like to really go back to, if I would start designing again, would be the materiality of things. Restriction. Innovation happened because they were restricted to concrete that time, and that whole materiality of brick and concrete, that's what produced IIM Ahmedabad. So it's sort of, how do you, we are spoiled for choices now, and we are spoiled for dressing up our buildings also. It's part of a commercialization and a larger politics of consumption. And how do you simplify it? How do you bring in sustainable materials? And I think this generation is going to do a lot. I have big hopes for this generation, because our generation grew up thinking concrete was it. This generation says, why concrete? So I think there's a lot of hope with this generation, with idea of earth walls, mud bricks, everything related to earth coming. But again, with that sense of design that came from high modernism. I don't think that is switching. So that's where I would be.
So one last, and this is not meant to be controversial and not like picking favorites, but I thought it's a good point in time to ask if, I mean, all three of you can answer this as well. If you have any favorite mid-century modern building, maybe with us due to association or just experience, because, I mean, you all are designers. So throughout your careers, you must have experienced or worked with or just like it for whatever reason.
My earliest memory was driving by Kanchenjunga as a little child and asking, looking at the building and saying, I love whatever that is. So for me, that'll always be a very, very strong memory, and therefore a favorite. And also because it's right here in Mumbai. So all the more reason.
Mahindra Towers. I worked there for close to 10 years. And I think it's one of the most beautiful buildings in the city. A first of many glass, external capsule lifts. No one's really done that. After that, that fountain is beautiful. I think I'm obsessed with Mahindra Towers in a way, if you talk about one building. And because we're now with Avid and here, and I must say that every time my school bus went past SR, because SR was also done by Adri, and I was in Mary's, and the school bus went through SR, and I feel that was the building that inspired me, because I loved that whole glass facade. It was like I used to say, wow, looking at that facade. So Mahindra Towers with Mr. Adri, and then again SR of Mr. Adri, two buildings that have inspired me.
If you can go back to the second slide. These are all the buildings that I still refer to. And it's not just because they're my father's engineering, but it's also because there was intense collaboration. I think that's what is the need of the time. When you were saying what we should keep also, is this collaboration and respect between consultants and architects, and how buildings should emerge as a true collaboration between equals. And I think many of his works are examples of that. So this at one level, if I talk about pure architecture, my favorite building remains Sangat, Vastu Shilp Foundation, Doshi's office. I think it's one of the most beautiful buildings which deals with climate, light, scale, and literally you feel the spirit. That's what Doshi was always trying to capture, the spirit which is beyond all of us. You feel it there. So that's what my building.
Thank you so much to all the panelists.
Thank you.
Yes, If anybody, the audience member, would like to ask any questions directed to a particular panelist, please.
And this is an open question to the panel itself. Uh, Very interesting presentations. Thank you. Just a quick one that how would each of y'all, distinguish between modern and mid-century modern?
Modern and mid-century modern, like modern as in no time period, like as in timeless.
In seeing and hearing, the slide presentations, your talks, would generically be categorized as modern architecture, modern design, modern style. So when we say that this is mid-century modern, what is the distinction?
I think the time, the economy of the time, and the socio-political situations which generated that.
Interrupting, just for clarity. So are we saying that only something that is in the 1950s is mid-century? Or, sorry, I'm just asking for a clarity.
So modernism is it is a lot of styles within one style. So Art Deco, Bauhaus, modernism, mid-century modernism, all of that, international style and all of that sort of kind of fall within. So it's largely, as a whole, you would call it the 20th century modern. That is what it is called. And within that, you have a lot of bifurcations, a lot of styles, which were then regionalized as well. So mid-century modernism, we are largely focusing on the nation-building period, where, you know, that's the reason why we have examples of Chandigarh and we have all the housing complexes that were coming up. So it's essentially for India, mid-century modernism becomes this post-Bauhaus kind of post-independence sort of late 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. That would essentially become India's mid-century modernism. But of course, it's not just defined by a time period. It's also defined by the design principles that were essentially there. And when it came to India, a lot of these things were contextualized. So the mid-century modernism, which you would see in Europe and elsewhere, wouldn't necessarily look the same like what would be in India.
Like Doshi's Sangat is actually what they call critical regionalists. It's not mid-century modernism, whether it was done in that time or not, because the parameters of that design is very different. But all these buildings done till 74, till mid-70s, they were done with a certain inspiration in mind. And there was, so I would call it mid-century. Yes, in terms of a broader ideology, then those, you have all the different categories, and we still have it. I mean, people are still doing it. So it's that is the greatness and the failure of modernism.
So, very interesting presentation. Just sitting and thinking, I mean, mid-century modern is a fantastic design language in a way. But why is Art Deco on everyone's mind? Because, like your Fairmont near the airport is been inspired by Art Deco to a great extent. I know the one you're doing in Udaipur is different. But everyone talks about Deco, right? If you're making new furniture, if you're going back to a little retro, it's Deco. Very rarely are people are. I would go and buy a Chandigarh chair. I mean, I have one. But why does Deco have that kind of romance of a design style and mid-century modern doesn't?
I think from where I see it, Asad, I feel that mid-century modern as a design aesthetic is very adaptable, and we've kind of almost grown with it. You see it everywhere. It's almost like second nature in so many ways. It could be in moments, like I mentioned earlier as well. I think that's why it doesn't have that sense of specialness anymore. But I feel like with Deco, I mean, because it's not part of what we do anymore. It's so nostalgic. It's in the past. You saw it in some old place somewhere exotic. I feel like it makes it special because it's not that accessible anymore. Mid-century modern, with time, has become what it is today in 2025, and we're still going back to that all the time. So that's what I think. That's the reason why you still romanticize Art Deco and not so much mid-century modern, but you appreciate mid-century modern so much more because you live with it every day. And go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Also, you're doing mid-century modern still. You're not doing Art Deco. Art Deco's heritage, so obviously it has that special place in everyone's mind. Mid-century modern is so simple that we're still doing it. We're now terming it as mid-century modern, but if you see, it's part of our lives. As I said, it's timeless. Art Deco is not timeless. And if you talk about mid-century, mid-century is much way better than Art Deco in Mumbai. Art Deco doesn't have any greenery, but mid-century modern, every building has greenery. To answer your question as well, it's very simple. Mid-century modern is smaller than modernism. You take Air India building, it's modern. Ground floor to 40th floor is the same. Mid-century modern will have glass, will have stone, will have concrete. You look at NCPA right next to it. So you'll have modern, and then you'll have mid-century. And then you go to Bandra and you look at the 1960s, 70s buildings. They'll have arches on it. They'll have random grills on it. They are postmodern. So that's modernism, postmodernism, and then you have mid-century that's there, which is part of the entire modernism.
Just to add to Asad's question, answering that, I think it's also got to do with the period and the kind of society that was there at that point in time. I feel Rohit has mentioned frugality in his presentation, and a lot of his. I think that's also the mindset of the society at that point in time, right? We were a new nation coming out of a kind of a post-colonial era. You had to be frugal about stuff. So it is, in that sense, it is very simple and strict, and that sort of mentality. Whereas Art Deco is, of course, more flamboyant and more rich. And so, like she rightly said, Shivani, it's all about nostalgia. So I think, it's a personal choice, and I wouldn't pitch one against the other because they are quite very different. But I think it also ends up, the way we've been brought up and how we've imagined things, and our parents' generation. I think that also plays a kind of role in there.
It's regarding the petroleum house, the open floor plan. Now, considering the behavior of people who work over there, some introverts would require private spaces, extroverts would probably require open spaces, my assumption. But my experience with working in office cubicles with sales teams is they would require more private. Of course, you don't want when you speak to your clients, you don't want the others to, even the next department. So I like the half cubicle kind of system where, it's department system, and each department has a private thing to themselves where they discuss their own private stuff, and plus they are working there kind of. So always open spaces may not work everywhere.
Yeah, open spaces is, when you say an open floor plan, now it's changing. It's got cubicles, everything, but eventually you can stand in one place and look at most of the office. But that doesn't mean that everyone has got open spaces. I'll quickly tell you, we did Mantralaya and we gave them an open floor plan, and they all protested with black bands because they wanted cabins, for what? So it really doesn't matter. In a sense, when you say open floor plan, it's about the design of the building, that the columns are far apart. And you have more space. What you do inside it, then of course it'll be much better designed as a mid-century interior when it goes. But when you're talking about on a larger place, it's just about the columns and the structural part of it.
Well, thank you, Shivani, Nikhil, and Rohit for this wonderful presentation. It took me back to, I've been to Frank Lloyd Wright's winter home in Arizona. It's a museum. And the stuff that you see there is all what you spoke about. Shivani, was there green chairs an extension of the adaptation of the Chandigarh chairs? Yeah, I noticed that. Very cool. But thank you, and thank you to Sanaya for so skillfully moderating edition 3. There will be 4 and 5. The 4th one is going to be Indo-Saracenic. We don't know when. Just probably early next year. But before that, we have another very interesting program here next Tuesday, 14th of October. We're going to be doing a curtain raiser for all things Environmental Film Festival, which will be presenting filmmakers, actors, and curators. Thank you all for being. I need to do a few more polite thank yous. To the NGMA, Nidhi and Shruti for hosting us, Intact Greater Mumbai chapter for partnering with us, and especially to our audiences for braving the lockdowns that we are having right now and coming here in decent numbers. But do follow us on, just check out our website for our next programs, or stalk us on Instagram like normal people do. Thank you very much and have a wonderful evening.